Hi everybody. So today's class is going to continue on with the topic of speciation. So we're going to spend really all week on this topic, and so we're going to continue on with entry 24. If you're not able to make it to class, we're going to start with our wildlife journal as always. So if you click on the link, it'll take you to the website where you can choose from the different cameras. In class, I'll have the eagles on in the background, so if that was kind of your default, then go ahead and search for those, but in class that's the one I'll have. And so this will be our third entry, and I'll just make that a note here. Let's see, entry number 3, which is 426, because that is the date. Oop, not 446, yikes. All right, there we go, 426. Then I'm going to jump into this presentation, and if there's class time at the end, my goal is to at least do another one of those getting to know you Jamboard activities where I have that linked out as well. In terms of homework, I'm going to be giving an article to read towards the end of class with a couple of questions attached to it. So that's going on the 24B page. And so then your job really is to finish out entry 24 as a whole. We're going to continue on with the topic of speciation next class, but the entry itself should be complete. So I'm going to kind of hop into the presentation, and this is starting on slide 14. So we're going to focus in right away on day 2. If you'll remember last class, we had talked a little bit about what a species is, and that's where two creatures that would interbreed or have babies under normal conditions. And as soon as two creatures cannot do that, then they are considered different species. We also talked a little bit about how you can see this on a tree diagram or an evolutionary tree, and that's anywhere you see those branching points. That really shows where one common ancestor branched and split into multiple species. And those are on the top of your 24A page. Today in day 2, we're going to focus in a little bit more on how the process of speciation takes place. So to do this, we're going to go to the Galapagos, and we're going to learn today about Darwin's finches. And I'm not going to show this video in class, but there are so many super awesome species that exist very uniquely on the Galapagos Islands that I put a little video, in there to just kind of highlight some of them. So if you do get a chance, hop over to the presentation and click on the short video to learn about some of the really cool species. For example, they have the only marine iguanas, as well as these guys on the right. They're called blue-footed boobies. Really cool. And if you're asking where the Galapagos Islands are, they are technically part of Ecuador, in South America. So we have Latin America up top here, South America, Ecuador is right here, and then off of the coast in the Pacific Ocean are the Galapagos Islands. So that's really where we're going to be focusing in. In class as well, I'm going to be showing a Howard Hughes Medical Institute video. I forgot exactly how long it is. It's 16 minutes in length. It's called The Beak of the Finch. So I'm going to show that in class, and I want you to make sure that you hop over to the presentation and watch it. You could either Google it or within the presentation, just kind of click on it. And it talks specifically about Darwin's finches and how one ancestral species became many different species that we can see today on the different islands. And then we're going to kind of create a cartoon that goes along with that. So here we are going to set up the A page. Once we march through the video, I'm going to have everybody kind of take a couple of moments to set up their A page on the steps of speciation using Darwin's finches as an example. And you could do this as 4 panels from left to right. I just wanted to make sure that you guys had enough space in your journal to do this. So I kind of made it box style, 1, 2, 3, 4. And we're going to use that video that we watched to kind of pick out the key pieces of speciation. And I have each one of those pieces on a slide following this one. So the first that we are going to kind of look at and draw, we're going to put in box 1 of our cartoon drawing here. And I did my best. I took my literal drawing of what is going on and pasted it in. Not super creative genius. And then what I'm going to want you guys to end up doing is drawing a sketch of your own and then writing our bullet points or our normal kind of notes text underneath. Or you could do it vice versa, put the words up top and the picture underneath. But I want you to make sure that you have kind of the picture and the words that go with it as well. So if you want to pause and take a moment and copy all that down and then listen to the description, or vice versa, that's up to you. But before speciation can occur, distance, or D, is significant. For example, here between Ecuador and the Galapagos Islands, specifically Santa Cruz, where they looked at in the video, there's a certain really large distance. And I kind of tried to capture that as I could here in my picture to the right. There are a lot of unique species in the Galapagos Islands, and Hawaii also is kind of a second example, because the distance is too large for there to be any natural crossing between them. And so I'm gonna don't go between islands and because there's such a large distance between the mainland and the islands in this instance, or you could even think about the western United States and Hawaii, the distance in the ocean is so great that most creatures would never be able to naturally cross or go back and forth. Australian animals are another good example, right? The distance is too great for species to be able to naturally just move back and forth. So that's why there are a lot of unique species in this area that you can't find, because the distance is great. And so it creates this isolating aspect of what's on the island stays on the island. What's on the mainland stays on the mainland. And that's what leads us to number 2. In this particular case, what ended up happening is a small population of finches were blown. So they didn't make it themselves per se. They were blown in a severe storm and made it from the mainland to the island. And then since the distance was so great, they were kind of stuck there. So a splinter population, this population that was blown by the storm, is essentially cut off. They are isolated from the main population on the mainland. And they have their own certain genetics, and there's lots of ways that this could happen. In this case, it was a severe storm. And most instances of organisms that this would happen to would perish or die. They would get to this new island and just not be successful, and that would be the end of it, and we would be back to only mainland finches. However, if that population survives, that will bring us to the next step. So we had some kind of great distance, and now we have a certain subset of the population isolated by geography. And if they don't die, then we'll move on to step 3. So just make sure that you have some kind of text and a visual to go along with this idea of geographical isolation. And then once though that population is there and it actually survives instead of dying, then through mutations and natural selection, which we've learned about that process before, different populations begin to adapt to the new environment. In this particular instance, beaks start to change shape to fit the island's food sources. So some finches, their beaks changed over time to eat smaller seeds. Some beaks changed to eat harder, bigger seeds. And so it was kind of a division of resources. And over time, those different populations adapted to the different food sources. And eventually, if a barrier to reproduction develops, that should be something different, meaning that they can't interbreed anymore, then we get to the fourth step, which is reproductive isolation. We get new species. When they can no longer interbreed in those natural conditions, they are new species. So even if they aren't isolated anymore, if you put them back together, they are separate species. And from then on in that evolutionary tree, you get their own evolutionary paths. You get that branch point. So now the finches will travel along different tracks. And here, as we learned, in addition to changing beaks for food, we hypothesize that changed beaks, or we also affect finches' songs. And they sing for their mates. So in addition to reproductive isolation in the sense of different beaks for food, those beaks are used for mating, and that again could eventually lead to that reproductive isolation. The big fat beaks will sing different songs than the tiny little longer beaks, and therefore mates might be chosen very selectively, and that can lead to that reproductive isolation that helps get them to become different species as well. So make sure that you have some kind of picture here in the text as well. I have a photo of what my final version ended up looking like with time kind of going down the side so you could see the progression of time. From before speciation, then a population becomes isolated. Those isolated populations begin to adapt through natural selection to the new environment. And then eventually, if reproductive isolation occurs, you now have different species. And then at the end of class, what we're going to end up doing is I'm going to give you the article that kind of talks a little bit more specifically about how the beaks of the finch as they changed are also responsible for the changing of their song. I have a link to the article here. I also have a narrated reading of the article. So if I click on it, it'll bring you to the article. And then as you scroll through, you'll see I have the narrated version right here that you can click on if you want to listen to me read it out loud. And then there's some analysis questions. And so on your B page, you are going to answer those analysis questions. If I kind of hop back over to our PowerPoint, you're going to read the article and see if you can identify the key elements of speciation. Can you identify the isolating effect? Can you identify the adaptations through natural selection? Can you identify the reproductive isolation? And then you're going to answer the analysis questions. And then I'm just going to put here, you will answer the analysis questions. So there you go. That's kind of the task for today. If you need any other additional resources, there's a reading here. There's also a nice little follow-up Amoeba Sisters video on speciation that if we do have extra time in class, we will watch. Your goal? Today we learned more about the process of speciation, looking at it through the lens of the finches and the Galapagos. We practiced making a 4-panel cartoon, which is something that we're going to also do next class. And your job is to finish entry 24. That's it. Thank you.